So the House just passed a big budget bill that will cut over $1.5 trillion of government spending over the next 10 years. And a lot of people want to know one or two things right now. They want to know how this bill will affect Trump's tax plan and his tax cuts, which we know if that goes into effect, many individuals, business owners, and investors will pay less taxes. Or two, people also want to know how these spending cuts may affect them directly. Right now, there are a lot of people concerned about different programs like Medicaid, Medicare, and many other government programs that they rely on. So as a licensed CPA that has read this bill in its entirety and has been already updating you with every major progression in Trump's tax plan, I want to help you understand this quickly and what this may mean for your unique situation. All right, so if you don't know, President Trump is looking to pass what will be known as one of the largest tax cuts in US history, which involves extending the 2017 tax cuts, which will keep tax brackets low, the standard deduction higher, and extend many other tax breaks for business owners and investors, like the 20% QBI deduction, for example, bonus depreciation, and so much more. Plus, on top of all of that, he wants to introduce even more tax cuts, like cutting taxes on overtime pay, Social Security benefits, tips, and corporations who make products in America, amongst many other things. And one of the biggest obstacles to passing any one of these items is figuring out how to pay for it. Because cutting taxes means that the government will receive less tax revenue or income that could otherwise be used to pay for various government programs or expenses. And for context, the government has already been spending nearly $2 trillion more than current tax revenues that it receives. So cutting taxes more without cutting spending would make this problem even worse. And that is what the House Report 119-4 solves for. It is an official agreement on the government's budget for 2025 through 2034. So let's look at the major changes in spending here, starting with the most significant. And by the way, the numbers that I'm about to share with you are over a 10-year period. So please keep that in mind. This is not just for 1 year or just for 2025. No, these changes will affect your taxes and the government spending for many years to come. So let's break this down. Okay, so let's start with number one. Increasing the deficit by up to $4.5 trillion through the Committee on Ways and Means. And yes, you heard that correctly. We are talking about increasing government spending here. And that is because this committee has jurisdiction over all taxation, tariffs, and other government programs, which makes sense because, like I mentioned earlier, Trump's tax cuts will come at a cost to the government. And this budget allocation effectively opens the door for additional tax cuts, like the ones that we're seeing in Trump's tax agenda, making them even more of a possibility for taxpayers who are looking to benefit from them. But to afford this, the bill also includes massive spending cuts, like number two, reducing the deficit by at least $880 billion through the Committee on Energy and Commerce, which oversees programs like Medicaid, Medicare, and the Affordable Care Act, and many other public health and energy programs, which many people right now are perceiving to mean that Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act would be cut significantly. For example, in the bill itself, there is a letter included from Democrats that state that the bill proposes at least $880 billion in cuts to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act, and that more than 20 million people rely on the Affordable Care Act, and more than 72 million people rely on Medicaid. However, when reading the bill, it specifically states that $945 billion will be allocated to Medicaid and other health programs in 2025 alone, and over $11 trillion will be allocated to Medicaid over the 10-year period that we are looking at. So without getting into the politics too much here, my assumption is that Medicaid will still exist, but this committee will be tasked with cutting at least $880 billion in spending, and Medicare, to be fair, is the largest expense category under its jurisdiction, so we will have to wait to see what actually happens here. But in addition to this spending cut, the bill also proposes number three, reducing the deficit by at least $330 billion through the Committee on Education and Workforce, which currently oversees programs like federal student aid, Pell Grants, student loan forgiveness, K-12 grants, and so on. So if this type of spending is reduced, it poses the question of how government assistance may change for individuals who receive these types of grants and student aid. Now, the next big spending cut is to number 4, reduce the deficit by at least $230 billion through the Committee of Agriculture, which oversees the SNAP program or food stamps, subsidies for farmers, conservation programs, and much more. So people who benefit from these types of programs may also see more stringent requirements to qualify for these types of programs or benefits. And Democrats have argued that the bill will, quote, slash at least $230 billion from food assistance programs at a time where grocery prices remain at record highs. And number 5, the bill also proposes to reduce the deficit by at least $50 billion through the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, which primarily oversees the federal workforce and compensation, the U.S. Postal Service, waste and fraud in the government, which we're hearing more about, and more. And in a short period of time here, we have already seen a number of different headlines regarding thousands of federal employee layoffs at the IRS, TSA, and various health agencies in the federal government. So it's clear that the government is already in the works of reducing spending here. Now, outside of cutting spending, the government is also budgeting some increases in spending through the Committee on Armed Services, which oversees defense spending and military operations. The budget allows for an increase in the deficit up to $100 billion. And it also allows another $90 billion in increased spending for the Committee on Homeland Security, which oversees the DHS, national security, and other immigration enforcement programs. So over the next decade, this is a general overview of how the House plans to adjust its spending in respect to the economic agenda, the deficit, and potential tax changes from the Trump administration. And if you are excited about the new tax cuts and breaks from Trump's tax agenda, then this update is a step closer to that agenda becoming a reality. But there are far more details to sort out here when it comes to the actual policies that will pass. And if you want to stay in loop on those changes, make sure you subscribe to our channel. And by the way, if you currently pay a lot of money in taxes to the government right now, and you want an immediate plan to reduce it, just apply to work with one of my CPAs today at mycpacoach.com.